114 missed calls. That's what was waiting on my phone backstage, in the 90 seconds before I walked out under the lights to accept an award for a company I'd built from a single leased office to 11 buildings across 2 states. I was standing in the wings of the Crown Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a navy suit I'd had tailored for exactly this kind of night, and my hands were steady. My hands are always steady. That's not a boast. It's just true, the way it's true that I don't take sugar in my coffee or that I check a lease 3 times before I sign it. My assistant, Priya, had handed me my phone 30 seconds earlier with a look on her face I'd never seen from her in 6 years of working together. Not panic. Something worse. Pity. You need to see this before you go out there, she said. The video was 41 seconds long. It had been shot on someone's phone at the step and repeat outside the ballroom doors, the kind of red carpet backdrop with sponsor logos where the local business journal does quick interviews before the ceremony starts. A reporter I recognized, microphone in hand, was talking to my wife. "And who do we have here?" The reporter asked, gesturing at the man standing beside her with his hand resting on the small of her back like it belonged there. My wife smiled the smile I had fallen in love with 9 years ago at a fundraiser for the Charlotte Ballet, the smile that still, even now, still made something in my chest go quiet for half a second before the rest of what I was watching caught up to it. "This is Julian," she said. "My husband." The reporter laughed, charmed, and moved the microphone toward Julian, who said something about being proud of her, about how far she'd come, and the two of them stood there under the string lights while the crowd behind them murmured and clapped for someone walking the carpet, and nobody in that frame, not one person, thought to ask where the actual husband was, because the actual husband was standing 40 feet away in a curtained hallway with a plaque about to be handed to him for building. The company that had funded the business his wife had just handed to another man in front of a live camera. I want to tell you that I felt rage. That would be the honest expectation. What I actually felt, watching that video for the first of what would become many times, was something closer to recognition. The kind of recognition you get when a number in a spreadsheet finally makes sense, when you've been staring at a discrepancy for weeks and suddenly you see exactly where the error was seated. Priya was still standing there, waiting for some reaction from me, some instruction, anything. I handed her the phone back and asked her one question. Did the chamber board see this? 2 of them, that I know of. Maybe more. Okay, I said, and I remember the word landing strangely in my own mouth, the same flat, contained word I would use again a few hours later in a different room, to a different person, for a different reason. Then the stage manager appeared at the curtain with a headset and a clipboard and said the words that end most conversations in that particular hallway, "Mr. Cade, we're ready for you," and I straightened my jacket, the way I always do before I walk into a room where people are watching, and I put the phone in my inside pocket, and I walked out into the light. I handed Priya back the phone. Behind the curtain, the MC was saying my name. "Please welcome this year's recipient of the Crown Award for Visionary Leadership, founder and CEO of Cade Development Group, Marcus Cade." I walked out into the light and smiled and shook the chamber president's hand and gave a 4-minute speech about resilience and reinvestment in Charlotte's End corridor that I do not remember writing and do not fully remember delivering, and the entire time, 114 missed calls sat in my pocket like a stone. Before I tell you what I did after I walked off that stage, let me tell you how I got there. Because the story of how my wife came to introduce another man as her husband in front of 600 people is not a story that started that night. It's a story that started 3 years earlier, and if you'd asked me at any point along the way, I would have told you I was the luckiest man in Mecklenburg County. My name is Marcus Cade. I'm 42 years old. I run a commercial real estate development firm out of an office on South Tryon Street in Charlotte, and over the last 16 years I've taken vacant warehouses, dying strip malls, and half-finished lots and turned them into the kind of mixed-use developments that show up in magazine spreads about the New South. I started with $40,000 of savings and a construction loan I nearly didn't qualify for. Last year, Cade Development closed just under $61 million in project value. I built it slowly, methodically, the way you build anything that's supposed to last. I don't cut corners. I don't take shortcuts on due diligence. And until that night in the Crown Ballroom, I would have told you I applied the same discipline to my marriage that I applied to my business. I met Lavaiza Duarte at that ballet fundraiser 9 years ago. She was 26, working as an event coordinator for a boutique hospitality group downtown, and she had this way of walking into a room of Charlotte's old money crowd and making every single person feel like the most important conversation she'd had all night was the one she was currently having with them. I watched her work that ballroom for 20 minutes before I found a reason to introduce myself. She was sharp. She noticed things: which sponsor was underdressed for the room, which vendor was overcharging, which centerpiece arrangement wasn't going to survive the humidity coming off the terrace doors. I liked watching someone who paid that kind of attention. We dated for 18 months. I proposed at the top of the Duke Energy Center, and she cried, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that I had found someone who understood the value of building something instead of just wanting it handed to her. We married at a vineyard outside Asheville. Her parents drove up from Savannah. My father wore the same brown suit he'd worn to my college graduation because he doesn't believe in buying clothes for a single occasion, and he told a toast about how he'd taught me to check the foundation before I ever looked at the roofline, and everyone laughed like it was a joke about houses, and it wasn't, not really. 2 years into the marriage, Lavaiza told me she wanted to start her own event planning company. She'd spent 6 years coordinating other people's visions and she wanted to build something with her name on it. I didn't hesitate. I've spent my whole career recognizing when someone has the instinct to build, and I believed she had it. I put in an initial $2 million, office space in South End, a small operations team, a marketing budget, enough runway to take the company through its first 18 months without needing to chase every job that came through the door. We structured it properly, the way I structure everything. I held 70% ownership through a holding entity my attorney set up. Lavaiza held 30% and ran day-to-day operations as founder and creative director. It was called Wisteria Events, and within a year it was doing weddings for 2 of the wealthiest families in Charlotte and a gala for the Panthers Foundation. I was proud of her. I want to be clear about that, because everything that comes after this is going to sound like the account of a man who never believed in his wife, and that isn't true. I believed in her completely. That's exactly why what happened cut as deep as it did. Somewhere around the 18-month mark, Wisteria brought on a creative director to help scale the design side of the business, a 31-year-old named Julian Voss, who had come out of a boutique branding studio in Atlanta with a portfolio full of the kind of moody, editorial event photography that gets shared on design blogs. Lavaiza hired him without running it by me, which I noted but didn't flag, because it was her company to run and I'd promised her exactly that kind of autonomy when we structured the deal. I started noticing things about 5 months before the awards night. Small things, the kind of things you catalog without meaning to, the way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation wall and tell yourself it's just settling. Lavaiza started taking client calls from the guest bedroom instead of the kitchen table where she'd always worked. She said the acoustics were better. Maybe they were. She started attending vendor walkthroughs on weekends, which hadn't been part of her schedule before. She stopped asking me to look over contracts, which she'd done religiously for the first year. She used to slide vendor agreements across the dinner table and ask what I thought of the indemnification language, and then 1 month it just stopped, like she'd found someone else whose judgment she trusted more, or didn't need mine anymore at all. And there was a shift in the way she talked about Julian. Not suspicious, exactly. Just frequent. His name started appearing in sentences the way a business partner's name appears. Julian thinks we should reposition the brand. Julian's handling the Ashford wedding, Julian says. I noticed it the way you notice interest rates creeping. 1 basis point doesn't mean anything. A pattern does. There was a Tuesday in February I still think about. I came home early from a site walkthrough that had wrapped ahead of schedule, and I found the guest bedroom door closed and Lavaiza's voice on the other side of it, low, the particular register people use when they don't want a conversation carrying through a house. I didn't listen at the door. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy to, and some version of me even considered it. I made noise coming up the stairs instead, deliberately, the way you clear your throat before you walk into a room you suspect someone doesn't want you walking into, and by the time I reached the landing the door had opened and she was standing there saying it had been a vendor call, a difficult one, a florist threatening to walk off the Ashford wedding 2 weeks out. It was a plausible story. Florists do threaten to walk. I filed it away instead of arguing with it, the way you file away a discrepancy in a financial statement that could be explained a dozen innocent ways and only becomes meaningful once you've got 6 more discrepancies sitting next to it. There were other things. She started working out at a different gym, one across town near the Wisteria office instead of the one 4 minutes from our house that she'd gone to for 3 years. She started referring to weekends as the Wisteria calendar instead of our calendar, small linguistic drift that meant nothing on its own and everything in aggregate. And there was a night in early spring when I asked, the way I used to ask constantly, whether she wanted to grab dinner and talk through the numbers on a piece of land I was under contract for near the airport. She used to love that, used to ask sharp, specific questions about cap rates and absorption timelines that told me she actually understood what I did for a living and found it interesting rather than just tolerable. And she said she was tired, and I let it go, and I noticed, quietly, that it had been months since she'd asked me a single question about the business at all. I didn't confront her. I want to be honest about why, because I think people assume restraint means you're not paying attention, and it's the opposite. In my business, the worst thing you can do when you sense a deal going wrong is react before you understand the full structure of what's actually happening. You ask a few more questions. You pull a few more documents. You let the other side keep talking, because people who think you don't know anything will tell you everything. I've walked away from acquisitions worth 8 figures because I trusted my instinct over an incomplete data set, and I've closed deals other people walked away from because I waited long enough to see the whole picture. I applied the same discipline here, whether or not it was the healthiest way to live inside a marriage. I don't know that there's a better way. I only know the one I have. So when the Crown Award nomination came through in early spring, Cade Development had been shortlisted for visionary leadership by the Charlotte Chamber. I didn't change anything about how I was living. I let Lavaiza help plan our table for the event. I let her handle the seating chart, the sponsor introductions, the whole choreography of the evening, the way she handled every other event in her professional life, competently and with total confidence. I had no idea she'd invited Julian as a guest until I saw the seating chart 3 days before, and even then, I told myself it made sense. Wisteria had done event design for 2 chamber galas, and networking was networking. I told myself a lot of things in those 3 days that, looking back, were the sound of a man talking himself out of a conclusion he'd already reached weeks earlier. If you're following along and you've been in a situation where you started collecting evidence without meaning to, where you found yourself quietly building a case in your own head before you'd even admitted to yourself what the case was for, drop a comment below, because I want to know I'm not the only one who does this. And if this story is pulling you in already, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because the next part is where everything changes. The video Priya showed me backstage wasn't the first crack. It was the moment the entire wall came down at once, in front of 600 people, on a live stream that the Chamber's marketing team had set up to run on the ballroom's overflow screens for anyone seated too far back to see the carpet. Which meant that by the time I was accepting my award, half the room had already seen the clip of my wife introducing another man as her husband, Liv, on the screens directly behind the podium where I was standing. I found this out later. I didn't know it in the moment. I just knew that when I looked out at the audience during my speech, there were a handful of faces that weren't watching me the way you watch a man accepting an award. They were watching me the way you watch someone who doesn't yet know what's about to hit him. The 114 missed calls were, I learned once I finally had 5 minutes alone in a service corridor off the ballroom kitchen, from my brother, my chief financial officer, 2 members of the chamber board who apparently felt some obligation to warn me before I walked out, 3 separate business contacts who'd seen the clip circulating in a private Charlotte networking group chat, and, 6 times, from Lavaiza herself, though notably none of those calls had come before the video was recorded. She'd called me after she realized what she'd said on camera, not before. I stood in that corridor, still holding the plaque, and I called exactly one person back. My attorney, Renata Cole, who has handled every piece of Cade Development's legal work for the last 11 years and who does not do small talk, does not do sympathy, and has never once in a decade of working together asked me a question she didn't already know the answer would matter to. She picked up on the first ring. Marcus. I've seen it. Everyone's seen it. I need the Wisteria operating agreement pulled tonight, I said. The full cap table, the governance provisions, and anything relating to majority holder rights. You're moving on this tonight. I'm moving on it tonight. You know that's a 70% stake in a company with her name over the door. I know exactly what it is, Renata. That's why I'm calling you instead of calling her. There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause I recognized because I'd heard it from her before, right before a deal was about to get complicated in a way she respected. Give me until 9 a.m. I said that would work. Then I called my brother. Desmond Cade is 39, runs a commercial general contracting business out of a yard off Wilkinson Boulevard, and has poured concrete for half the foundations under buildings I've developed over the last decade. We talk most days. He's the person I trust with information before I've even decided what I think about it. I saw it, he said, before I got a word out. Dad saw it too. Somebody sent it to the group chat. I need you to not say anything to him yet. I'll call him myself. You don't sound like a man whose wife just torched his night on a live stream. I don't have the luxury of sounding like that right now, I said. I have to give the after remarks in 20 minutes. Desmond was quiet for a second. Are you going to stand up there and smile? I'm going to stand up there and finish the job I came to do. What happens after that is a different conversation. That's cold, Marcus. It's not cold. It's sequencing. He laughed, short and humorless, the kind of laugh you give someone when you understand exactly what they mean even if you wouldn't have the discipline to do it yourself. Call Dad, he said. Tonight. Don't let him hear it secondhand. I called our father at 9:40 that night, standing in a parking garage 3 blocks from the Ritz-Carlton because I couldn't make myself go back inside the ballroom for the after-party circulating with a room full of people who just watched my marriage end on a jumbotron. Elias Cade is 68. He spent 31 years as a union electrician before he retired, and he still lives in the same brick ranch house in Steel Creek where Desmond and I grew up, and he has never once in my adult life told me what to do, only asked me questions until I told myself what to do. I told him what happened. He didn't say anything for a long moment, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Did she know the cameras were live? He finally asked. I don't know yet. Probably not. Doesn't change what she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. You spent money building that girl a business. I did. Then it's yours to unbuild, if that's the decision you make. But you don't do it tonight in anger. You do it tomorrow with a clear head, or you don't do it at all. He paused. What are you going to do tonight? Finish the event. Go home. Wait for her. That's the right move, he said. A man who reacts in the moment is a man who lets somebody else write the story. You let the story sit until you're the one holding the pen. I've thought about that line more times than I can count in the months since. My father spent his life running conduit and pulling wire through walls other men had already framed, and somewhere in 31 years of that work he developed a kind of patience I don't think you can learn any other way. He taught me that the panel doesn't get energized until every connection is checked, and checked again, and that the men who skip that step are the ones who burn a house down thinking they saved 20 minutes. I went back into the ballroom. I shook more hands. I let 3 different people offer me some version of hang in there, man with the particular awkwardness of people who don't know if you know what they know, and I gave nothing back except a level, unbothered nod, because I had already decided, standing in that parking garage, exactly what my night was going to look like, and it did not include giving 600 people in Charlotte's business community the show they were quietly hoping for. I got home at 12:20 in the morning. Lavaiza's car was already in the driveway. I let myself in through the side door off the kitchen, the way I always do, and found her sitting at the island with her makeup half removed and a glass of wine she hadn't touched sitting in front of her, untouched the way things sit in front of people who poured them for something to hold rather than something to drink. Marcus. My name in her mouth, careful, testing the room the way you test ice. I saw the video, I said. I set my keys down on the counter, deliberately, the same spot I always set them. It wasn't, she stopped. Started again. The stream wasn't supposed to be running yet. I didn't know it was live. That's not actually the part one care about, Lavaiza. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face shifted, the recognition that I wasn't going to give her the argument she'd apparently rehearsed on the drive home, the one built around the accident of timing rather than the content of what she'd said. How long? I asked. 9 months. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Maybe closer to 10. It wasn't, I didn't plan for it to happen. He understood the business in a way that. I don't need the justification. I need to know if you're telling me the truth about the timeline, because I'm going to need it to be accurate. Why does the timeline matter? Because everything in that company is time-stamped, Lavaiza. Every decision, every contract, every dollar of the $2 million I put in. And I am going to need to know exactly which decisions were made by my wife and business partner, and which ones were made by a woman who was already planning her exit and just hadn't told me yet. She set down the wine glass she hadn't been drinking. This is what you're doing right now? Talking about the company? I'm talking about the only part of tonight that I actually have the power to do something about, I said. I can't undo the video. I can't undo 9 months. What I can do is make sure I understand exactly what I built, and exactly what I'm no longer willing to fund. You're going to punish Wisteria because I made a mistake. I'm not punishing anything. I'm a 70% owner reassessing a business relationship with a partner who introduced another man as her husband on a live stream in front of the entire Charlotte business community. That's not punishment. That's just accurate. She was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the rehearsed quality entirely. What happens to me? That depends on what you mean by you. If you mean Lavaiza Cade, my wife, Renata will be in touch tomorrow about the separation filing. North Carolina requires a year apart before the divorce is final, and I intend to follow the process exactly as it's designed to work. If you mean Lavaiza Duarte, founder of Wisteria Events, that's a different conversation, and it's happening at 9 a.m., not at midnight in our kitchen. You're really going to take my company. It was never just your company, Lavaiza. It has my name on the funding documents and my capital in the walls of that office. I built the foundation you've been standing on for 2 years. I'm allowed to decide I'm done holding it up. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again there was something almost pleading underneath the careful composure she'd been holding all night. Is there a version of this where we talk instead of you just executing a plan you made in a parking garage? We're talking right now, Lavaiza. That's not what this is. This is you informing me of decisions you've already made. I made the decisions because I understand my options and I know what I want, I said. That's not the same as refusing to talk. You had 9 months to talk to me. You had 100 dinners where you could have told me something was wrong, that you wanted out, that you'd started feeling something for someone else. Any one of those conversations, I would have listened to. I would have been hurt, but I would have listened, and we would have figured out an ending that didn't require a live stream and a Chamber of Commerce audience to get there. You didn't choose any of those nights. You chose tonight, in front of 600 people, without even meaning to, because you'd stopped being careful. That tells me something about how far gone this already was before I found out. I never wanted to hurt you. I believe that, I said, and I meant it, the way I'd meant most of what I said to her since I walked through the door. I don't think you woke up 9 months ago and decided to hurt me. I think you found something that felt easier than the life you'd built, and you let it grow because it was easier than ending something on purpose. That's a very human thing to do. It's just not something I'm willing to keep funding. Funding, she repeated. That's the word you're going to use. It's the accurate word. I funded a business. I funded a life. I'm allowed to stop. She looked down at her hands, and for a moment the performance dropped away entirely, and what was left looked less like the woman who'd introduced another man as her husband on a red carpet and more like someone genuinely afraid of what came next. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you decide to do, I said. That's the part one can't help you with anymore. I spent 9 years helping you decide things. I'm not going to do that tonight. She didn't argue after that. I think some part of her had already run this scenario before it happened, maybe not this exact version, but some version where the math finally caught up with the story she'd been telling herself. I told her I'd be staying at the Dunhill downtown for the time being, and I packed a bag while she sat at the island not moving, and I left before 1 a.m, and I did not raise my voice a single time. Renata called at 9:05 the next morning. I've been through the operating agreement 3 times, she said. You have full authority to initiate a buyout of the minority stake under the founder exit provisions. Given the material breach language around conflict of interest, Julian Voss's employment contract explicitly bars romantic entanglement with ownership, by the way, which nobody flagged when we drafted it, but it's there, standard boilerplate, and it applies. Good. You also have the option of simply dissolving the holding structure and walking away with your capital intact, minus whatever's already been spent. Or a full buyout of Lavaiza's 30%, which would leave you sole owner. Buy her out, I said. Fair market valuation, nothing punitive. I'm not trying to leave her with nothing. I'm trying to leave her with exactly what's hers and not $1 more. And Voss? Terminated for cause, effective immediately. His contract's clear. I don't need to be vindictive about it. I just need to follow what's written. By 11 that morning, Wisteria Events bank accounts, vendor relationships, and lease were fully under my sole control as majority, and now, pending the buyout, sole owner. Julian Voss's employment was terminated within the hour, citation of contract breach clean and unambiguous, no negotiation, no severance beyond what North Carolina law required. 3 vendors called within the day asking what was happening. I told each of them the same thing. Wisteria Events was undergoing a leadership transition and all existing contracts would be honored in full. I meant it. I wasn't interested in burning down 2 years of legitimate client relationships because of what had happened in my kitchen the night before. I was interested in removing the 2 people who'd built something inside my investment that had nothing to do with the business itself. I also called my accountant that same morning, a careful, unhurried man named Wallace Ito who has kept Cade Development's books clean for 9 years and who has a habit of asking exactly one question before he does anything. Do you want this handled quietly or do you want it handled fast? He asked. Both, I told him, and he said that was rarely possible but he'd try. By that afternoon, he'd produced a full accounting of every dollar that had moved through Wisteria's accounts in the preceding 18 months, flagged for anything irregular. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect from a functioning small business: payroll, vendor deposits, marketing spend that had actually generated bookings. But there was a recurring monthly transfer, small, $1,100, categorized generically as creative consulting, that had started 9 months earlier and run every month since, paid out to a personal account that traced back to Julian Voss beyond what his salary already covered. Not a fortune. Not embezzlement in any legal sense, since Lavaiza had the authority as day-to-day operator to authorize vendor payments under a certain threshold without my sign-off. But it told me something I hadn't fully let myself understand yet, that whatever this had been, it hadn't been reckless or accidental. Someone had been routing money on a schedule, month after month, and calling it something else on paper. I didn't pursue it legally. It wasn't worth the cost of proving intent for 11 months of a rounding error. But I kept the file. Some information you hold on to not because you'll use it, but because it settles a question you'd otherwise keep asking yourself at 2 in the morning. 2 days later, my brother showed up at my hotel with coffee from the place on South Boulevard we'd been going to since we were teenagers, and he didn't say anything for a while, just set the cup down and sat across from me in the small hotel room armchair like he had somewhere better to be and had decided against it. You holding up? He finally asked. I'm functioning. Not what I asked. I thought about it honestly, because Desmond's the one person I don't perform composure for. I keep thinking about the 2 years before I noticed anything, I said. Not the last 5 months. The 2 years before that, when I thought we were building something. I keep trying to figure out where the real version of her stopped and the performance started, and I don't think I'll ever get a clean answer on that. Does it matter? I used to think it would. I'm not sure it does anymore. Either she meant it and then stopped, or she never meant it at all, and either way I end up in the same place. Desmond nodded slowly. Dad asked me if you want to know whether she loved you. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. What do I tell him? I looked out the window at the city I'd spent 16 years building pieces of, cranes still moving over 3 different sites I could see from that floor, and I thought about it honestly before I answered. Tell him I think she loved the version of me that made her life easier. I don't know if that's the same thing. He didn't push it further. We sat there and drank the coffee and watched the cranes move, and it was the first hour since the ballroom that had felt like something other than triage. The story didn't end quietly, not entirely. Charlotte's business community is smaller than it looks from the outside, and word travels through it the way water travels through limestone, finding every crack. Within a month, it was widely known that Wisteria Events had changed ownership, that its founder was no longer involved, and that the creative director everyone had assumed was simply talented had, in fact, been something else entirely. I never confirmed the specifics to anyone who asked. I just let the paperwork speak, filed public records, LLC amendments, a press mention about Wisteria's renewed leadership direction that I approved and nothing more. My father's rule. Don't make noise. Let the silence do the talking. Lavaiza moved out of the house in Steel Creek, our house, technically, though I'd bought it with my own capital 2 years before we married and it had never been anything but mine on paper, which Renata confirmed within the first week of the separation filing. She took a leasing job doing event coordination for a hotel group downtown, the kind of work she'd been doing back when I met her at that ballet fundraiser 9 years earlier, and I understood the symmetry of that even if I took no satisfaction in it. I'm not in the business of wishing anyone back to zero. I just wasn't willing to keep funding a life that had already left mine. The buyout of her 30% closed 6 weeks after the ballroom night, clean and at fair value, exactly as Renata and I had structured it. Julian Voss, from what I heard through the small, gossiping ecosystem of the Charlotte event design world, left the city entirely within 2 months, taking a position with a firm in Nashville. Whether that was ambition or exile, I couldn't tell you, and I stopped being curious about it somewhere around the time I stopped being curious about most things involving either of them. Cade Development closed its fiscal year 8 months later with its strongest numbers in company history, a mixed-use development along the Blue Line light rail corridor that I'd been quietly assembling land for over 18 months finally broke ground, a project worth more on its own than everything I'd built in my first decade in business. I moved into a new place downtown, a converted mill loft on the same corridor I'd developed years earlier, the kind of building I used to walk past as a younger man and think, someday. I slept better there than I had in the house in Steel Creek and longer than I'd admitted to myself. Wisteria Events, under its new creative director, a quiet, exacting woman named Priya's cousin, Anjali, who I'd hired within a month of Vasa's termination, grew faster in its second year under sole ownership than it had in its first 2 years combined. We landed the design contract for the Chamber's own gala the following spring, the same ballroom, the same string lights, a different account entirely, run clean, run well, and I stood in the back of that room during setup and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, not vindication, exactly, but a kind of settled certainty that the thing I'd built was sound, that it had never needed her specifically to work. Only the discipline and capital I'd put behind it in the first place. My father came to see the new loft about 4 months after I moved in. He walked through it slowly, the way he walks through any building, checking outlet placement out of old habit, running a hand along an exposed brick wall like he was testing the mortar. "You did good work here," he said, and I understood he wasn't just talking about the loft. He sat on my balcony that evening with a beer he barely touched and told me, unprompted, that he'd worried about me more in the 2 weeks after the ballroom than he had in years, not because he thought I'd fall apart, but because he thought I might handle it so cleanly that I'd forget to actually feel any of it. "Don't mistake composure for healing," he said. "One's a discipline. The other takes time even when you're good at the first thing." I've thought about that more than almost anything else anyone said to me that year. I ran into Lavaiza once, about 5 months after the divorce was finalized, at a coffee shop on South End's rail trail on a Saturday morning. She looked well, thinner, tired around the eyes in a way that suggested the last year had taken something out of her that she hadn't gotten back yet. We stood there for a second, the way you do when someone from an old life appears in a context you weren't braced for. "Marcus. Lavaiza. You look good," she said. "The new development, I saw the write-up. Congratulations." "Thank you." I meant it, the same flat, level way I'd meant most things I'd said to her in the year since the ballroom. "How's the hotel group treating you?" "It's fine. It's not wisteria." Something crossed her face, not quite regret, something adjacent to it. "I think about that place a lot. What it could have been." "It's doing well," I said. "New creative directors solid. Client rosters grown." She nodded, absorbing that the thing she'd built and lost was thriving without her, which I recognized wasn't an easy thing to hear, and I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and I've never found much use in softening a true thing just to make a moment more comfortable. "I know I don't get to say this and have it mean much," she said, "but I am sorry. For all of it. The way it happened, you didn't deserve to find out like that." "No," I agreed. "I didn't. But I appreciate you saying it." We didn't hug. We didn't linger. She said, "Take care of yourself," and I said the same back, and we went our separate directions down the rail trail, and that was the last time I saw her. I heard, months later, through the same slow-moving current of Charlotte gossip that had first told the city what happened between us, that she'd left the hotel group and moved to Raleigh to be closer to a sister who'd relocated there for work. I don't know if that's true. I've stopped tracking the details of her life the way I once tracked, without meaning to, the small changes that told me something was wrong. There's a particular kind of peace in no longer needing to know. My name is Marcus Cade. I'm 42 years old, I run a development company in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a year ago, in front of 600 people and a live stream I didn't know existed, I found out my wife had introduced another man as her husband while I was 30 feet away preparing to accept an award for the life I'd built. I didn't yell. I didn't confront her on a stage or in a parking lot or anywhere with an audience. I finished the night I'd shown up for, and then I went home and I made the decisions that needed to be made, methodically, in the order that made sense, starting with the truth and ending with the paperwork. I think a lot of people believe that dignity and devastation can't exist in the same body at the same time, that if you're not falling apart, you must not have been that hurt to begin with. I don't believe that anymore, if I ever did. I was hurt. I am, in some quieter way, still working through what 9 years and $2 million and a business I helped build actually meant, now that I know what was happening underneath it. But I learned a long time ago, from a man who spent 31 years making sure a live wire never touched the wrong thing, that the moment right after you find out something is broken is exactly the wrong moment to start swinging a hammer. You check the panel first. You find every connection. And then, and only then, you decide what gets rebuilt and what gets torn out for good. If you've ever had to hold your composure in the exact moment everyone around you expected you to break, on a stage, in a boardroom, at a dinner table, anywhere, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me how you got through it, and whether you think staying calm cost you anything or whether it was the only thing that actually got you to the other side in one piece. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, because we tell stories like this every week, and we're just getting started.